There is a strange kind of silence in the Afghan nights. After the chaos of the day, the bursts of gunfire, the thundering rotors of helicopters, the constant hum of radios, the night falls heavy and suffocating, like a blanket thrown over the land. But in that silence, things lurk, things that are not meant to be seen or heard. A platoon of 12 American soldiers was ordered to establish a temporary observation post in a deserted valley near Kandahar. On the maps, the valley was marked as a no man's land, neither controlled by the Taliban nor by NATO. Just a dead zone, the kind of place nobody wanted to claim. But the locals had a different name for it. They called it the Valley of Shadows. Villagers warned the soldiers not to stay after sundown. They spoke in whispers about shapes that moved without bodies, about screams that echoed when no one was there. Captain Harris, leading the platoon, kept a small leather-bound journal. His entry for that evening was short but unsettling. There's something about this place. Even before the sunset, the men grew restless. The air feels heavier here. The villagers said not to camp inside the valley. They said, shadows walk here, not men, not animals, something else. As darkness swallowed the valley, the men busied themselves, cleaning rifles, smoking cigarettes, whispering nervously to each other. Yet, beneath their tough exteriors, every soldier felt the same thing. They were being watched. Private Miller was the first to notice something strange. He pointed toward an old half-buried Soviet-era bunker carved into the rocky hillside. Everyone assumed it had been abandoned for decades, but from the cracks in its stone walls, a faint glow was seeping out. It wasn't the warm orange of a fire. It was green, sickly, unnatural, almost burning to the eyes. "Sir," Miller muttered, his voice tight, "I think someone's inside that bunker." Captain Harris raised his binoculars, but through the lenses, all he saw was darkness. The glow had vanished. The bunker stood silent, lifeless. Still, something wasn't right. Then, as the soldiers kept their eyes fixed on that bunker, a shadow appeared on the wall. A tall, twisted silhouette, walking slowly across the stone. But there was no one there to cast it. No body. Just the shadow, sliding across the rock face on its own. By midnight, the valley had grown colder than usual, the kind of cold that seeps through bone and makes teeth chatter. The soldiers pulled their jackets tighter. They tried to ignore the weight pressing on their chests, the sensation that the darkness was thickening around them. And then it came. At exactly 2:07 a.m., a scream tore through the valley. It wasn't human, but it wasn't animal either. It was both. It was a shriek that twisted into a wail, high-pitched and guttural at the same time, vibrating through their helmets until their ears rang. The sound alone nearly dropped half the men to their knees. Private Jackson, panicked, raised his night vision scope toward the hills. At first, he thought the lenses were malfunctioning. He blinked. He adjusted the focus. But no, the figure was real. Standing near the edge of the rocks was something not meant to exist. Its frame was long, too long, its bones jutting against skin that looked torn and stretched thin like old leather. Its eyes glowed like hot coals, unblinking, staring directly at the scope. "Oh my God," Jackson gasped, his voice cracking. "Contact! Contact!" Gunfire erupted instantly. The night exploded with muzzle flashes, the valley echoing with the thunder of automatic weapons. Bullets ripped into stone, dust clouds rising, flashes lighting up the twisted ridges. The men shouted, cursing, calling targets they couldn't clearly see. And then silence. The smoke cleared, the glow vanished. The figure was gone. The men scanned the hillside with shaking hands. There was no body, no blood, no trace of what they had just fired upon. But in the dirt, just at the edge of their camp, they saw them. Tracks, massive prints pressed deep into the soil, unlike anything they had seen before. Long, claw-like impressions, far too large to belong to a man. And the prints were not leading away. They were leading toward the camp. Every man in that platoon felt the truth settle in their chest like ice. This was no ordinary mission. This was no ordinary enemy. The war they had walked into was not against men. It was against something far older, far hungrier. The camp was no longer a place of safety. After the horrifying scream and the glimpse of the twisted figure, the men barely slept. Each soldier kept a finger hovering over the trigger, rifles clutched tightly, eyes darting into the shadows that seemed to stretch and twist unnaturally around them. At 0300 hours, the temperature dropped again. It wasn't just the cold mountain air. This was something different. It felt as though the valley itself was draining the warmth out of them, feeding on their fear. Private Miller muttered under his breath while loading another magazine. "This place ain't right, man. It ain't human." His voice cracked with the weight of terror he could no longer disguise. Captain Harris tried to maintain control. "Stay sharp. This is psychological warfare. The enemy wants us scared. That's all this is." But his words rang hollow. Harris had been to Iraq, to Fallujah, to the worst hellholes of Afghanistan. He knew what fear felt like, and this wasn't it. This wasn't an insurgent tactic. This was something beyond comprehension. At dawn, Harris ordered the men to follow the tracks they had discovered during the night. The claw-like imprints dug deep into the dirt, circling their camp before vanishing into a dry riverbed that led toward the mountains. The squad moved cautiously, weapons raised, boots crunching against the gravel. The silence was suffocating. No birds, no insects, not even the faint winds that usually whispered through the Afghan valleys. It was Private Delgado who noticed it first. He raised a trembling hand and pointed at the rocks. The claw marks weren't just in the dirt. They were etched deep into the stone itself, as though something impossibly strong had dragged itself across the boulders, gouging them with ease. "Jesus Christ," muttered Sergeant Doyle. "What the hell can cut stone like that?" No one had an answer. After 2 hours of following the trail, the soldiers came across the old Soviet bunker they had seen the night before. Up close, it was even worse, half buried in rock, its concrete walls cracked and covered in black moss. The air around it stank of rust, earth, and something sour like rotting meat. "Stack up," Harris ordered. The men moved into position, hearts pounding. Miller kicked the rusted door, and it screeched open. The inside was dark, damp, and narrow. Rusted barrels and decayed wooden crates lined the walls. The faint green glow they had seen the night before flickered again, but it wasn't coming from a lamp or torch. It was seeping from cracks in the floor, pulsing faintly, like the heartbeat of the earth itself. Private Jackson gagged. "Smells like death." At the far end of the corridor was a mural painted on the bunker's concrete wall. It wasn't Soviet. It wasn't Afghan either. The crude artwork showed tall skeletal figures with burning eyes surrounding soldiers, their claws dripping with blood. Beneath them were strange runes scratched into the cement, symbols no one could recognize. "What the hell is this?" whispered Miller. Before anyone could answer, the radio on Sergeant Doyle's chest crackled to life. But it wasn't static. It was whispering. Voices layered on top of each other. Some in English, some in Pashto, others in languages none of them could identify. The voices hissed one word over and over: "Leave, leave, leave." Then the radio went dead. The silence that followed was worse than the whispers. They didn't make it out of the bunker before the first attack. Private Delgado, who had taken rear guard, screamed. When the others spun around, he was gone, dragged into the shadows at the end of the corridor by something impossibly fast. His rifle clattered against the concrete. His scream cut off in an instant, replaced by a wet, tearing sound that made every stomach turn. "Contact!" Harris shouted, opening fire down the corridor. The others followed suit, muzzle flashes lighting the walls, filling the bunker with deafening echoes. But in between the flashes, they saw glimpses, long limbs scraping the ceiling, a jaw opening far too wide, glowing eyes darting in and out of the smoke. Then silence again. Delgado was gone. Only a smear of blood remained, streaked across the wall. Panic set in. The men stumbled out of the bunker, gasping for air, their nerves shattered. Sergeant Doyle grabbed Harris by the vest. "Sir, this ain't an enemy we can fight. We need to call for evac now." But the radio was nothing but static. Their comms had died the moment they entered the valley. By the time night fell again, the platoon was down to 11 men. They set up defensive positions, claymores planted around the perimeter, rifles aimed into the darkness. Nobody spoke. They all remembered Delgado's scream. At 0200 hours, the claymores detonated. The valley lit up in a thunderous explosion, rocks flying into the air. The men cheered briefly until they realized the mines hadn't stopped it. Something moved beyond the smoke. Dozens of glowing eyes appeared in the darkness. Not one creature, not two. Many. Private Miller dropped his rifle in horror. "Dear God, there's more of them." The eyes drew closer. The soldiers fired into the night, but the creatures did not scream, did not falter. Shadows darted between bursts of gunfire, claws flashing in the muzzle light. One by one, the men realized the truth. They weren't hunting the creature. The creatures were hunting them. And the war they thought they understood was only the beginning of something much worse. The valley was no longer just quiet. It was dead. Not a single sound of life remained. The 11 surviving soldiers huddled in the wreck of their makeshift camp, their nerves shredded by the encounter the night before. The mines had gone off. Their rifles had spat hundreds of rounds, but the creatures had simply vanished. Not killed, not scared off, just gone, as though they had never been there at all. The men barely spoke. Each one of them wore the same haunted expression, as if they were waiting for death to crawl out of the shadows at any second. Captain Harris tried to write in his journal again, but his hand trembled too badly to hold the pen steady. He scribbled anyway. "We are not fighting insurgents. We are fighting something else. It knows fear. It enjoys it. We are prey, not soldiers. This valley is a trap." At dawn, Harris made the call to move. Staying in the valley was suicide. If they could reach the ridgeline 2 miles north, maybe they could get a signal strong enough to call for extraction. They moved out in staggered formation, rifles raised, eyes scanning the barren hillsides. Every shadow looked alive. Every gust of wind felt like a whisper. For nearly an hour, nothing happened. The men began to relax, just slightly. whispering to each other about getting out, about hot showers, about leaving this cursed place behind. Then Private Carter, who was bringing up the rear, spoke over comms. "Sir, I think we're missing someone." Harris froze. He turned to count his men. 1, 2, 3, 10. There should have been 11. Private Miller was gone. No gunfire, no scream, no struggle. He had simply vanished. One moment he had been there, his boots crunching on the gravel, his breath clouding in the morning air, and the next moment, nothing. "Eyes up," Sergeant Doyle barked, spinning around in panic. The men swept their weapons across the rocks and cliffs, but there was no sign of Miller, not even footprints leading away. His trail just ended. Private Jackson's voice cracked. "It's playing with us. It's taking us one at a time." The trail eventually led them to something none of them had expected. A village hidden in the folds of the valley. But this wasn't a normal village. The mud brick houses were shattered and burned, roofs caved in, doors hanging loose on rusted hinges. Yet the strangest thing was how fresh it all looked. The fires had gone out, but the ash was still warm. "This wasn't on the map," Doyle muttered. "Stay sharp," Harris ordered. As they moved between the crumbling homes, the soldiers noticed something even worse. There were no bodies, no men, no women, no children, just abandoned clothing, dropped toys, cooking pots still full of half-burned food. It was as if the villagers had been plucked out of existence in the middle of their lives. Private Jackson entered one of the houses and came back pale. "Sir, you need to see this." Inside, scratched into the mud walls, were hundreds of handprints, small ones, children's hands, each one smeared in what looked like dried blood. And beneath the prints were the same strange runes they had seen in the bunker. Symbols carved deep into the clay, glowing faintly in the dim light. Suddenly a radio crackled. It was Miller's voice. "Help me!" The men froze. Harris grabbed the handset. "Miller? Where are you?" The reply came in gasps, wet and broken. "Behind you." Every soldier spun in unison, weapons raised. The street behind them was empty. But one by one, the radios on their vests began to echo the same voice. Miller's voice, all of them, at once. "Behind you, behind you, behind you." The sound built into a distorted chorus, screaming through the radios until the static was deafening. And then it stopped. Panic spread like fire. The men pulled out of the village, sprinting for higher ground. But the valley would not let them go. From the cliffs above, shadows shifted. Figures too thin to be human darted between rocks, their movements jerky and unnatural, like broken marionettes. Private Carter opened fire, his bullets sparking against the stone. For a second, the creature appeared in the muzzle flash, its limbs grotesquely long, its mouth stretching open with no sound, its eyes glowing with pure hunger. Then it vanished again. The squad kept firing, the echoes bouncing between the cliffs. But their bullets hit nothing. Every time they thought they saw one of the creatures, it dissolved into shadow. Suddenly Carter was lifted off his feet. Not pushed, not thrown, lifted. His body rose into the air, arms and legs flailing, before being dragged screaming into the darkness above. The soldiers fired blindly, their rounds sparking against the cliff walls. But Carter was gone. His screams faded, replaced by silence. Private Jackson dropped to his knees, sobbing. "We're not gonna make it. We're all dead men." Captain Harris grabbed him by the collar, forcing him to look him in the eye. "We move. We keep moving. That's an order." Do you hear me? But even Harris could feel the truth sinking into his bones. The valley was bleeding them dry, one by one. By nightfall, the survivors stumbled upon a cave carved into the hillside. With no better option, they retreated inside, setting up a perimeter with what ammo they had left. The cave was damp and narrow, the walls scarred with deep claw marks that stretched far into the darkness. The air stank of rot, thick and suffocating. Sergeant Doyle whispered, "This isn't shelter. This is where they live." And he was right. On the walls of the cave were more murals, more runes. This time, the drawings were clearer. Soldiers, their eyes gouged out, their bodies torn apart, surrounded by the same skeletal creatures with burning eyes. Private Jackson began to hyperventilate. "It's been here forever. Longer than us, longer than this war. We're trespassing in its home." Then came the sound, not a scream this time, not whispers. Breathing, deep, heavy, rattling breaths, echoing from the depths of the cave. The men raised their rifles, flashlights trembling in their hands, and from the blackness, 2 glowing eyes opened, then 4, then 6. The cave walls seemed to move as shapes detached themselves from the shadows, crawling on all fours, their claws scraping against the stone. The soldiers realized the awful truth. They had not found shelter. They had walked straight into the nest. The cave swallowed every beam of light. No matter how bright their flashlights burned, the darkness devoured it, shrinking each glow into trembling cones. The surviving soldiers, Captain Harris, Sergeant Doyle, Private Jackson, Private Delgado, and 3 others, stood back to back with rifles raised, breaths shallow, and heartbeats hammering so loudly they seemed to echo through stone. From the shadows, glowing eyes multiplied. Dozens of them, circling, waiting. The creatures crawled across the ceiling, clung to the walls, and skittered along the floor, with limbs bending at unnatural angles. Their claws scraped the rock like knives cutting bone. "We're surrounded," Delgado whispered. But the creatures didn't rush. They lingered just beyond the edges of the light, watching, hunting, toying with their prey. "Stay calm. Conserve ammo. We shoot only when they move in," Harris ordered, trying to steady his voice. Calm was impossible. Every second stretched into eternity. Deep inside, each man knew the valley wanted only one thing: to consume them whole. The silence shattered. A blur of movement shot down from the ceiling. A creature lunged, claws stretched wide. O'Connor fired, muzzle flash exposing the nightmare. A skeletal figure with skin stretched thin, its jaw unhinging wider than anything human. Bullets tore through its body, but it didn't bleed, didn't scream. It twisted midair and carved O'Connor's throat open in a spray of blood before vanishing again. O'Connor collapsed, gurgling, while the others unleashed fire. Thunder filled the cave, sparks and smoke ricocheting off the stone. But when the haze settled, the thing was gone. Only O'Connor's lifeless eyes stared back, frozen in terror. Jackson broke, screaming, "We can't kill them!" "Shut up and hold the line," Doyle shouted, his voice cracking. Staying meant death, yet retreating deeper was madness. Harris made the call. "Move, follow me." They advanced into twisting tunnels. Their boots crushed something brittle. Harris shone his light down. Bones, skulls, rib cages, femurs, scattered and stacked in heaps. American helmets, Soviet dog tags, Afghan sandals, piles of the dead, spanning decades, maybe centuries. Delgado gagged, whispering, "Dear God, this is where they bring everyone." Jackson fell to his knees, sobbing, "We're already dead." Just next in line, the cave groaned as though it agreed. At last they reached a vast chamber. The walls were carved with glowing runes, veins of sickly green light pulsing as though alive. At its center yawned a black pit that seemed to breathe. From its depths rose whispers, thousands of voices speaking as one, a chorus of the damned. "What the hell is this?" Doyle muttered. Harris's face drained of color. "This isn't war. This is something older, something that's been here forever. We should never have come." The whispers swelled into a shriek, shaking the stone, and the green glow flared. From the shadows stepped the creatures, dozens, maybe hundreds, emerging into the light at last. There was no more running. "Hold the line!" Harris bellowed. The soldiers poured out everything they had left. Bullets ripped through the swarm. Grenades thundered. The chamber trembled with fire and steel. The monsters rushed them, jaws wide, claws flashing. Delgado was dragged screaming into the pit, his voice fading into endless black. Doyle fought until his spine snapped against stone. Jackson curled into a corner, whispering prayers through tears, until a claw tore through his chest. The chamber drowned in gunfire, blood, and screams. Harris was the last. His rifle emptied with a hollow click. He drew his sidearm, firing until the chamber swallowed even those rounds. Surrounded by glowing eyes, he pulled out his journal. With trembling hands, he scrawled a final warning in the dim green glow. "To whoever finds this, we were not killed by insurgents. We were hunted. This valley hides something ancient. It cannot be stopped. Do not come here. Do not search for us. This place belongs to the shadows." He buried the journal beneath a mound of bones, raised his knife, and faced the tide. The last sight he knew was the pit blazing with green light as claws closed around him. Then came the roar of voices, followed by silence. Weeks later, when another unit searched for the missing platoon, they found nothing. No bodies, no gear, no trace of a fight, only silence. Deep inside the cave, hidden under bones, a single leather journal waited, its final page smeared in blood, its words clear. "They are still here. They are always here." And when the wind swept through the valley at night, it carried faint whispers from the dark. Not human, not animal, something else.